Hi everybody, Dr. Stutzer here. I want to talk a little bit about something we covered in class yesterday in terms of measurement and reliability and validity of tools. So in quantitative research, when we're measuring a particular concept, we utilize questionnaires or some other, or sometimes we call them tools. And so I want to go over the notion that we assign numerical values to concepts, to feelings, to experiences. An example, anxiety. Again, we can describe what anxiety looks like. We know an anxious patient or an anxious person when we see them. We know when we're anxious, we know what it feels like. But if we want to understand the impact of an intervention, we actually have to give anxiety a number, and then we can measure anxiety and give it a number. We can provide an intervention, and then we can remeasure anxiety and give it a number again and see if that intervention impacted on the level or the amount of anxiety that the patient or the person had. So what happens is we need to know that we're measuring anxiety and we're not measuring restlessness, or we're measuring depression and not sadness. And so there needs to be a way to assess and evaluate what that tool is measuring so that we have confidence, just like when you take a blood pressure, we have confidence, or a temperature, we have confidence that those tools are measuring what we intend them to measure. And that is called psychometric properties. So you might see that term somewhere. And the key measures of that are reliability and validity. So reliability is, again, does the tool measure what it's intended to? So does the scale measure weight, and does the blood pressure cuff measure blood pressure? Does the anxiety tool measure anxiety? Does the depression tool measure depression? And we determine the reliability, that it measures what it's intended to, and that we can count on it to consistently measure what we expect it to, through three different types of reliability. So test retest is how consistent the scores are over time. So we measure anxiety at time 1 and we measure it at time 2 with no intervention there, just testing that the tool actually is measuring in a way that we can count on. There's no recommendations in the literature for the time between those two, but if you are reading a study and they say that they use test retest reliability, then they should tell you what time 1 and time 2 was. And again, it's important that the researchers report the reliability of the tool, because it could vary from population to population, or from sample to sample. Internal consistency means that there was consistency across all the different items in an instrument. So again, I've used burnout as an example. Burnout has 3 subscales. There's multiple questions. Does the measurement across all of the items in each of the subscales, is it consistent? And is the overall measurement of the burnout consistent? And so that tells us that the items all connect well to each other in their measurement of that particular phenomenon. You will see it reported as Cronbach's alpha, so they may say Cronbach's alpha. They may just use the alpha sign. And we like to see that alpha coefficient 0.70 or better in order to say that we find that tool reliable in measuring the phenomenon in the population. And then inter-rater reliability is when we're observing to collect data. So we're doing a study and we're observing hand washing, or we're doing a study and we're observing, for example, the no interruption zone, how many interruptions happened. And we're making sure that across a group of people who are rating or observing the phenomenon, that it's consistent. So there should be some report about inter-rater reliability assessment when observational studies are done. And there is a statistic called Cohen's kappa. If they report that, it should be greater than 0.75. Then validity tells us the test measures what it intended to measure. So we wouldn't expect a scale to measure blood pressure. We wouldn't expect a a tool to measure anxiety, to measure depression. So it's what is it that this tool or questionnaire is supposed to be measuring, and how do we know that it accurately is doing that? So there's 4 types of validity. Face validity is you read the questions on the tool, and on the face of it, it seems logical that the information that the researcher is looking for, or the concept that's being studied, is actually there. And one of the ways that, and so that's just looking at it on the face of it. Then content validity is that the content actually represents the concept being measured. So how do I determine that the items on this particular tool, instrument, questionnaire, those are, I'm going to use those words interchangeably. You'll see them interchangeably in the literature. How do I know? How does the researcher know? Well, they get feedback from the review of the literature. So they've gone in and they've done a lot of looking at what other researchers have done, what kind of qualitative studies have described the particular phenomenon. They also go to content experts. So who are people that are knowledgeable, highly knowledgeable about that particular concept, and have them review the items to weigh in and say, yes, these make sense, or they need to be clarified, or some of them don't belong. Construct validity is used to evaluate the measures of the traits or feelings. And so these are now statistical tests where they're going to go in and apply a variety of statistics. So they administer the tool, and they can do things like looking at contrasting groups. So we're looking at, the example I used was moral distress. When that tool was developed, it was administered to occupational health nurses and critical care nurses, with the expectation that occupational health nurses would score much lower since they weren't being exposed to the situations that elicited moral distress in that tool. There might be ways to test the theory underlying the tool, and then there are very sophisticated statistical tests that are done around that. Sometimes you'll see them talk about factor analysis or multi-trait, multi-method. When you see those terms, those are the testing that's done to look at how all of the various components of the tool, of the measures, connect. And then criterion validity says to us, does the tool work and does it do what it's supposed to do? So you may see mention of that. As I said in class, measuring reliability of the tool should happen with each population or with each sample that the tool is used on. It is not, it's as they're running statistics, the researcher can request that. So that is important to do. Validity is a long, arduous process to put a tool together, and so you should see something about the fact that validity was confirmed. And that's often where you'll see an older citation because the work was done at back in time. So reliability, again, should be done with each study. Validity is done typically one time unless there's market changes in the tool, and then they might go in and retest it for validity. Sometimes researchers report reliability ratings from other studies, and that is okay, but not great, because again, the tool, the instrument, could perform differently in the particular sample that's being tested. So for reliability and validity, these are the things you want to see when you're reading. And remember, in Hopkins E, we're looking at a couple of questions that help tell us about the quality of the study, and reliability and validity are 2 of them. Okay, that's all I have I want to cover on this particular topic.